The morning sun painted Martha Walker's farmhouse in warm golden hues, masking the darkness that lurked inside its weathered walls. From the outside, the old two-story home with its wraparound porch and white picket fence looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, the perfect setting for a loving family. But appearances can be deceptive, and walls can hide terrible secrets. My name is Elena Richards, and this was my childhood home in rural Nebraska. I was 8 years old when my mother, Sophia, died of pneumonia during an unusually harsh winter. My father, Pablo, was away on a 6-month contract working on oil rigs in Texas, leaving me in the care of my grandmother, Martha, my father's mother. Before Mom died, our home was filled with laughter and music. She would sing Spanish lullabies while braiding my hair, teaching me the language of her Mexican homeland. Dad would join in with his terrible accent, making us both giggle. Grandma Martha lived with us but mostly kept to herself, disapproving of my mother's foreign ways, as she called them, though she never said it directly to Dad. "Your mother corrupts you with that Mexican nonsense," she would whisper when we were alone. "Real Americans speak English." But Mom just smiled and taught me anyway, telling me that knowing 2 languages was like having 2 souls. Those memories of my mother are like precious stones I've carried through life, hard, clear, and something to hold on to when darkness comes. And darkness did come, swift and merciless, the day Mom's fever spiked and her breathing became labored. "It's just a cold, sweetheart," she had said that morning, her forehead burning under my small hand. By evening, she could barely speak. Our neighbor, Mrs. Rosa Wilson, came over when I ran to her house in panic. She took one look at Mom and drove us to the county hospital 30 miles away through a blinding snowstorm. We were too late. Mom's lungs were filled with fluid. "Pneumonia, advanced stage," the doctor said, his face grim. "If only you'd brought her in earlier." I watched the light leave my mother's eyes as she clutched my hand, whispering, "Be brave, my little lion." Spanish was our secret language of love, and these were her final words to me. That night, as Mrs. Wilson drove me home, the world outside was white and silent, as if the snow had muffled all joy from the universe. My young mind couldn't process the finality of death. I kept thinking Mom would be home tomorrow or the day after. Surely she was just sleeping, like in the fairy tales where a kiss would wake her. But fairy tales aren't real, and neither are happy endings, at least not the kind I imagined. What awaited me at home was the beginning of a nightmare that would take years to escape. "Stop that sniveling," Grandma Martha snapped when I couldn't stop crying that first night. "Your mother was weak, always was. You can't be weak in this world." Her words stung like a slap. Mrs. Wilson, who had stayed to help with the funeral arrangements, shot her a disapproving look. "Martha, she's just lost her mother. Have some compassion." "Compassion doesn't build character," Grandma replied coldly. "The sooner she learns that life is harsh, the better prepared she'll be." Little did I know then how determined my grandmother was to teach me that lesson. The funeral was a small affair. Dad couldn't make it back. The winter storms had shut down all travel in and out of the region. I stood beside Grandma Martha as they lowered Mom's casket into the frozen ground, her hand gripping my shoulder so hard it left bruises. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't sad, but because I knew what would happen if I did. "You're all I have now," Grandma Martha said as we returned to the empty house. "And I'm all you have. Your father might not even come back, you know. Men often don't when left alone too long." "Dad will come back," I said with the certainty only a child can muster. "He promised." Grandma's lips thinned to a hard line. "Promises break easier than eggs, girl. Remember that?" That night, I cried silently into my pillow, clutching the small wooden lion Dad had carved for me before he left. "To remind you to be brave," he had said. I needed that bravery now more than ever, because with Mom gone, something changed in Grandma Martha. It was as if a mask had dropped, revealing a person I'd never truly known before. The transformation began subtly. The day after the funeral, she moved me from my sunshine yellow bedroom into the small windowless storage room off the kitchen. "Your room is too big for a child," she explained. "Too much space makes for lazy thinking." My new bedroom barely fit a narrow cot and a small chest for my clothes. The walls were lined with shelves of preserves and canned goods, giving the small space a perpetual smell of vinegar and damp. There was no light switch, just a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, operated by a string I could barely reach. "Can I at least keep my books?" I asked, hugging my small collection of fairy tales and picture books. "Books fill your head with nonsense," she replied, taking them from my arms. "You need to learn practical things now." That was the first night I went to bed hungry. "You didn't finish your chores," Grandma explained when I asked about dinner. "No work, no food. That's how the real world operates, Elena." My chores had multiplied overnight. Before, I had simple tasks: making my bed, feeding our cat Whiskers, setting the table. Now Grandma expected me to clean the entire house, do the laundry by hand, help prepare all meals, and tend to the small vegetable garden behind the house, even though it was winter and nothing grew under the snow. "Dig out the dead plants," she instructed, handing me a rusty trowel. "Work builds character." I stood in the freezing garden, my thin coat offering little protection against the biting wind, and dug until my fingers were numb and red. When I came inside, shivering, Grandma inspected my work through the kitchen window. "You missed half the garden," she said flatly. "Go back and finish." "But it's getting dark and I can't feel my hands," I protested, showing her my chapped fingers. The slap came without warning, stinging my cheek and bringing tears to my eyes. "Don't talk back to me," she hissed. "Your mother made you soft and disobedient. I won't have it. Now get back out there and finish what you started." I did as I was told, working until I could barely see, using the porch light's dim glow. When I finally came inside, my hands were bleeding from scraping against frozen soil and hidden rocks. Grandma didn't offer bandages or comfort, just a cold bowl of leftover oatmeal and a stern look. "Eat quickly and get to bed. Tomorrow we start your real education." As I lay on my narrow cot that night, listening to the house settle and creak around me, I wondered where the grandmother I thought I knew had gone. She had never been warm like Mom, but she had at least been civil. She would occasionally bring me hard candies from town and had once taught me to knit a simple scarf. Now it was as if that person had been replaced by someone with her face but a heart of stone. I didn't know then that people can hide their true nature for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I didn't understand that some people view kindness as weakness, or that cruelty can be a deliberate choice rather than a momentary lapse. At 8 years old, I only knew that I was alone with a woman who seemed to hate me, in a house that no longer felt like home. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I clutched Dad's wooden lion and whispered in Spanish, "Come back soon, Papa, please come back soon." I had no way of knowing that my father's return was still months away, or that things would get much worse before they got better. If I had known what lay ahead, perhaps I would have run away that very night, into the snow and darkness, taking my chances with the winter rather than with the monster who now ruled our home. But I didn't run, I stayed, believing that endurance was bravery and that things would somehow improve. I couldn't have imagined then how my grandmother's cruelty would escalate, or how close I would come to breaking before finally finding rescue. The worst was yet to come, and I was utterly unprepared for what the coming days would bring. The real education Grandma Martha had promised began before dawn the next day. She yanked me from sleep by pulling the thin blanket off my body, leaving me shivering in the cold morning air. "Lazy children don't succeed in life," she announced, towering over me in her faded flannel nightgown. "From now on, you rise at 5. The house needs to be clean before breakfast." For the next few weeks, a routine of grueling labor became my life. I scrubbed floors until my knees were raw, washed dishes until the skin on my hands cracked and bled, and learned to cook basic meals under my grandmother's critical eye. Any mistake was punished, sometimes with a slap or pinch, sometimes by being sent to bed without food, and increasingly often by being locked in the dark basement for hours. "This is for your own good," she would say as she pushed me down the creaking wooden steps into the cold cellar. "Your mother spoiled you rotten. I'm teaching you how the world really works." The basement was my greatest fear, a damp, pitch-black space filled with skittering sounds and the musty smell of decay. The first time she locked me down there, I screamed and pounded on the door until my voice gave out and my fists were bruised. After that, I learned to retreat into my mind during these punishments, imagining myself in Mom's arms, hearing her sing to me in Spanish, remembering the warmth of her smile. Winter's grip on our small town tightened as January gave way to February. Snow piled high around the farmhouse, isolating us further. The phone lines went down during a particularly bad storm, cutting off my weekly calls with Dad. These brief conversations had been my lifeline. Though I never told him what was happening, somehow Grandma Martha was always right beside me during these calls, her presence a silent threat. "Your father has more important things to worry about than your silly complaints," she would remind me before each call. "Men don't respect whiny, needy girls. If you want him to come home, you need to be strong and independent." So I lied during our conversations, telling Dad everything was fine, that Grandma and I were getting along well, that I was doing great in school. In truth, Grandma had decided that school was a waste of time after the Christmas break, and had informed my teacher that I would be homeschooled due to the difficult winter conditions. "Book learning won't put food on your table," she said. "I'm teaching you real skills." These real skills seem to consist mainly of endless chores, memorizing Bible verses about obedience and learning to suppress any emotion she deemed inappropriate, which was nearly all of them. Laughter was frivolous, tears were manipulative, and anger was disrespectful. The only acceptable state was quiet compliance. As the weeks passed, I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together in a haze of work and fear. I grew thinner as Grandma controlled my food intake, claiming I was developing bad eating habits and needed to learn discipline. My clothes hung loose on my shrinking frame, but there was no one to notice or intervene. No one except Mrs. Wilson, our neighbor, who appeared at our door one snowy afternoon in late February. Her visit was unexpected, the first outsider to come to the house since Mom's funeral. "Good heavens, Elena," she exclaimed when she saw me answering the door. "You're wasting away to nothing." Before I could respond, Grandma Martha appeared behind me, her hand finding my shoulder in that painfully familiar grip. "Elena's been a bit under the weather," she explained smoothly. "A winter bug going around. What brings you by, Rosa?" Mrs. Wilson's eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the scene, my too thin body, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinched under Grandma's hand. "I brought some of my chicken soup," she said, holding up a covered pot. "Best thing for a sick child. And I wanted to check if you needed anything from town. The roads are finally clear enough for driving." "How thoughtful," Grandma replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're managing just fine, aren't we, Elena? I nodded automatically, the pressure on my shoulder increasing. Well, I'd love a cup of tea before heading back, Mrs. Wilson said firmly, already stepping inside. This cold goes right through to your bones. Grandma had no choice but to invite her in. As she busied herself in the kitchen, Mrs. Wilson leaned down to my level. "Are you really okay, honey?" she whispered. "You don't look well at all." The concern in her eyes nearly broke me. For a moment, I considered telling her everything: the hunger, the basement, the endless work, the pinches and slaps that had graduated to hits with a wooden spoon or belt. But then I remembered Grandma's warnings. "If you tell anyone our private family business, they'll take you away," she had said. "They'll put you in a home with dozens of other unwanted children where terrible things happen. Is that what you want?" "I'm fine," I lied to Mrs. Wilson, the words bitter on my tongue, "just tired." She didn't look convinced, but didn't press further. Instead, she spent the next hour asking casual questions about what I'd been doing since leaving school, how I was coping with my mom's death, whether I'd heard from my dad recently. Grandma Martha answered most questions for me, painting a picture of cozy domesticity that couldn't have been further from our reality. When Mrs. Wilson finally left, promising to return soon, Grandma's facade dropped immediately. "What did you tell her?" she demanded, grabbing my arm so hard I gasped. "Nothing. I didn't say anything." "Don't lie to me." "I saw how she looked at you, how she kept asking questions. What did you say?" "I told her I was fine, just like you wanted," I cried, trying to pull away. The back of her hand caught me across the face, sending me stumbling into the wall. She didn't believe it. "You must have done something, said something to make her suspicious." "I didn't. I promise." But my protests fell on deaf ears. That night was my longest in the basement yet, from dusk until dawn, with no dinner and no blanket to ward off the bone-chilling cold. By morning, I could barely stand, my body stiff and aching from huddling on the concrete floor for warmth. "Let that be a lesson," Grandma said as she finally unlocked the door. "Private family matters stay private, always." As I dragged myself up the stairs, I felt something shift inside me, a tiny spark of rebellion igniting where only fear had lived before. Mrs. Wilson had seen something was wrong. She had asked questions. She had cared enough to notice. For the first time since Mom died, I realized that someone outside these walls might help me if they knew the truth. I just had to find a way to tell them before Grandma Martha silenced me for good. The opportunity to reach out for help came sooner than I expected, though not in the way I had hoped. 3 days after Mrs. Wilson's visit, I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, a thin soup made from whatever vegetables were left in our dwindling winter stores. Grandma Martha sat at the table, writing a letter to my father, dictating to me what I should say in my portion. "Tell him you're learning so much at home, that your grades would be excellent if you were in school," she instructed. "Tell him you're happy I'm teaching you how to be a proper lady." My hand gripped the knife I was using to chop carrots. Lies, all lies. I wasn't learning anything except how to survive her cruelty. I wasn't happy. I was starving, exhausted, and terrified most of the time. The unfairness of it all welled up inside me like a physical force. "No," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop it. Grandma's pen paused mid-stroke. "What did you say?" I should have backed down. Every instinct honed over the past months screamed at me to apologize, to retract, to submit. But something in me had reached its breaking point. "I won't write that," I said, turning to face her. "It's not true. I want to tell Dad what's really happening." She rose from the table slowly, her face hardening into the mask of rage I'd come to dread. "And what exactly do you think is happening, you ungrateful little brat?" "You're hurting me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You lock me in the basement. You hit me. You don't feed me enough. You won't let me go to school or see my friends. That's what I'm going to tell him." The next moments happened in a blur. She lunged across the kitchen, and by pure instinct I raised my hands to protect myself. The knife I'd forgotten I was holding sliced across her forearm, drawing a line of bright red blood. We both froze in shock. "You little monster," she breathed, looking at the cut. "You tried to kill me." "No, it was an accident." I backed away as she advanced, her wounded arm held out like an accusation. "Your father will never believe you now," she said, a terrible smile spreading across her face. "When he hears how you attacked me with a knife, he'll know what you really are. No one will believe anything you say." In that moment, I knew she was right. The small cut on her arm would become a vicious attack in her telling. My protests would sound like the lies of a violent, troubled child. Any complaint I made would be dismissed as manipulation or worse. I ran out the kitchen door, across the snow-covered yard, down the long driveway to the road. I had no coat, no boots, just my thin indoor clothes and socks that were soaked through within seconds. I didn't care. I had to reach Mrs. Wilson's house, half a mile down the road. She would believe me. She would help. The bitter cold bit into my skin as I ran, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. Behind me, I heard the screen door slam and Grandma's voice calling out, not in anger now, but in a high, theatrical wail, "Help! Someone help! She's gone crazy!" I ran faster, my feet numb, legs heavy as lead. The Wilson farmhouse came into view just as I heard the sound of a car engine behind me. Headlights illuminated the snowy road, and for a moment I feared Grandma had somehow gotten the old truck started to come after me. But it wasn't our truck. It was Sheriff Thomas's patrol car, making its weekly rounds of the outlying farms. I nearly collapsed with relief, waving my arms frantically as he slowed to a stop beside me. "Elena? Good Lord, child, what are you doing out here dressed like that?" he asked, quickly opening the passenger door. "Get in before you freeze to death." I scrambled into the warm car, my whole body shaking uncontrollably as much from fear as from cold. "She's hurting me," I managed to say through chattering teeth. "Grandma Martha, please don't take me back there." Sheriff Thomas looked at me with concern, noting my thin frame, the bruises visible on my arms where my sleeves had ridden up, the wild terror in my eyes. Before he could respond, Grandma Martha appeared, running down the road with a coat clutched in her hands, the very picture of a concerned grandmother. "Oh, thank goodness you found her, Sheriff," she called, reaching the car. "She's not well. Had a terrible episode in the kitchen, attacked me with a knife. See?" She displayed the cut on her arm, which had nearly stopped bleeding already. "The poor dear has been so troubled since her mother died. I've been at my wits' end trying to help her." I opened my mouth to protest, but Sheriff Thomas was already nodding sympathetically. "Grief affects youngsters in strange ways sometimes," he said. "My sister's boy started setting fires after his dog died, had to get him to a counselor in Lincoln before he burned the house down." "No," I cried, desperation making my voice crack. "She's lying. She locks me in the basement. She hits me. Please don't make me go back." The sheriff's expression softened into something almost worse than disbelief, pity. He thought I was crazy with grief, making up stories, perhaps even a danger to myself and others. "Now, Elena," he said gently, "I'm sure things seem very dark right now, but your grandmother loves you. She's trying her best to take care of you during a difficult time." "That's right, darling," Grandma Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I know you're hurting inside. We'll get through this together." The sheriff helped me out of the car, and despite my struggles, delivered me back into my grandmother's waiting arms. As she wrapped the coat around my shoulders in a show of caregiving, she whispered in my ear, too low for the sheriff to hear, "No one will ever believe you. No one." That night, as I lay bruised and hungry in the basement darkness, I understood what true despair felt like. I had tried to get help and had only made my situation worse. Now Grandma Martha had the perfect explanation for any injuries someone might notice. I was disturbed, violent, out of control. Who would believe a knife-wielding child over a concerned grandmother? For the first time since Mom died, I truly gave up hope. Dad wasn't coming back for months. Mrs. Wilson's suspicions hadn't been enough to save me. The sheriff had handed me right back to my abuser. There was no escape, no rescue coming. I closed my eyes in the darkness, no longer fighting the tears that came. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered in Spanish. "I tried to be brave, but I don't know how anymore." As if in answer, I felt a strange warmth envelop me, like the ghost of an embrace. It was probably just my mind playing tricks, desperate for comfort. But in that moment, it felt real enough to keep me breathing, to keep my heart beating through the long, cold night. What I didn't know then was that while I lay in darkness believing all hope was lost, fate was already turning its wheel. The next day would bring an unexpected visitor to our door, someone who would change everything. The morning after my failed escape, I was cleaning the front windows when I spotted a familiar truck coming up our long driveway. My heart nearly stopped as I recognized my father's old blue Ford, the one he had left behind when he went to Texas. For a moment, I thought my desperate prayers had somehow been answered, that Dad had returned early to save me. But as the truck drew closer, I saw it wasn't my father behind the wheel. It was his younger brother, my Uncle James, who lived about 3 hours away in Omaha. I hadn't seen him since Mom's funeral. Grandma Martha appeared beside me, her face tight with displeasure. "What is he doing here?" she muttered, more to herself than to me. "Go to your room," she ordered. "Stay there until I call for you." "But it's Uncle James," I protested. "I want to see him." The pinch she delivered to my arm made me yelp. "Did I ask what you want? Go now!" I retreated to my small room off the kitchen, leaving the door cracked open just enough to hear. Uncle James had never been Grandma's favorite. He was too much like my grandfather, she always said, too soft-hearted and impractical. Dad was her golden child, the one who had made something of himself by working hard and following her rules. "James," I heard her say as she opened the front door, "this is unexpected." "Hello, Mother," he replied, his deep voice carrying easily to my hiding place. I tried calling, but the phone lines must still be down. "They are. We've been quite isolated out here. What brings you all this way?" "I need to talk to you about Elena," he said directly, "and Pablo." There was a pause, and I could almost feel Grandma's suspicion radiating through the house. "What about them?" "Can I come in first? It's freezing out here." I heard the door close and their footsteps moving to the living room. I crept out of my room and down the hallway, careful to avoid the squeaky floorboards I'd memorized over the months. From the kitchen, I could just see into the living room if I stood at the right angle. Uncle James looked tired, his normally cheerful face drawn with worry. He sat on the edge of the sofa, refusing Grandma's offer of coffee. "I just got a very disturbing call from Pablo," he said without preamble. "He hasn't been able to reach you or Elena for over 2 weeks. He's frantic with worry." Grandma waved a dismissive hand. "As I said, the phone lines have been down. Nothing to be frantic about. We're managing just fine." That's not all. Uncle James continued. "He also got a call from Sheriff Thomas yesterday. Something about Elena running away, attacking you with a knife." My heart sank. So the sheriff had called my dad after all, but only to report my violent episode, not to express concern about my welfare. "Oh, that." Grandma sighed heavily. "The poor child has been so troubled since Sophia died. Having fits of temper, refusing to eat, making up wild stories. Yesterday she completely lost control. Thankfully, the sheriff found her before she got very far or hurt herself." Uncle James's expression was hard to read. What kind of wild stories? Nonsense. Really? Claiming I'm mistreating her, that I'm not feeding her. You can imagine how that hurts after all I've done to care for her. To my surprise, Uncle James didn't immediately sympathize as the sheriff had. Instead, he asked, "Where is Elena now? I'd like to see her." "She's resting. The doctor gave her something to help her sleep after yesterday's episode." This was a blatant lie. No doctor had visited, and I certainly hadn't been given any medication. I couldn't stand it anymore. Before I could think better of it, I stepped into the doorway. "I'm right here," I said. "And I'm not crazy. She's hurting me, Uncle James." Grandma Martha's face contorted with rage for a split second before she composed herself. "Elena, I told you to stay in your room. You see what I mean, James?" Completely defiant. Uncle James was staring at me, shock evident in his expression. I knew what he saw. A girl much thinner than she had been at her mother's funeral 2 months ago, with dark circles under her eyes and a fading bruise on her cheek from one of Grandma's lessons last week. "My God," he breathed. "Elena, come here." I moved to his side, staying well out of Grandma's reach. He gently took my arm and pushed up my sleeve, revealing the pattern of bruises in various stages of healing. His eyes moved to my face, taking in the bruise there as well. "Did your grandmother do this to you?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "She locks me in the basement when I make mistakes. She doesn't let me eat if I don't finish all my chores. She took me out of school. She made me lie to Dad." "She's making it all up," Grandma cut in desperately. "Children fall, they get bruises. She's clumsy. And she attacked me with a knife. Show him your arm, Elena. Show him the cut you gave me." I held out my unmarked arms. "I didn't cut myself. I never attacked her. The knife accidentally cut her when she came at me." Uncle James stood up, placing himself between me and Grandma. "I've heard enough. I'm taking Elena with me, Mother. Pablo asked me to bring her to him in Texas." "You can't do that." Grandma's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "I'm her legal guardian while Pablo is away. You have no right." "I have a signed authorization from Pablo giving me temporary custody," Uncle James said firmly, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "He was already worried after not hearing from you for so long. After Sheriff Thomas called, he contacted me immediately. I drove through the night to get here." Grandma's face went pale as she stared at the document. "This is ridiculous. The sheriff will never allow it. He knows the girl is unstable." "Actually, I spoke with Sheriff Thomas on my way here," Uncle James replied. "When I told him Pablo's concerns, he agreed it might be best if Elena stayed with family who could get her proper help. His exact words were, 'Martha's getting on in years. Maybe caring for a troubled child is too much for her.' The look Grandma gave me then was pure hatred, but for once I didn't flinch away. Uncle James's solid presence beside me felt like a shield. "Get your things, Elena," he said gently. "We'll be leaving as soon as you're ready." "She has nothing worth taking," Grandma spat. "Everything in this house belongs to me." "Just get what matters to you," Uncle James told me, ignoring her. "We can buy whatever else you need." I ran to my small room and grabbed the only possessions I truly cared about, the wooden lion Dad had carved for me, and a small photo of Mom that I had managed to hide from Grandma. Everything else, the 2 small clothes, the worn shoes, could stay behind. When I returned to the living room, Uncle James was standing at the door, keys in hand. Grandma Martha sat rigidly on the sofa, her face a mask of cold fury. "This isn't over," she said as we headed for the door. "She'll tell the same lies about you, James. That's what she does. She'll ruin your life like she tried to ruin mine." Uncle James didn't respond to her, just guided me out to his truck and helped me climb in. As we drove away, I watched the farmhouse recede in the side mirror, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the road. Only then did I finally release the breath I felt I'd been holding for months. "Are we really going to see Dad?" I asked, still half afraid this was a dream I would wake from. "We sure are, kiddo," Uncle James replied, reaching over to give my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "He can't leave the job site yet. He's got another month on his contract, but he's arranged for us to stay in the apartment he's renting down there. How does Texas sound? Warmer than Nebraska, that's for sure." "It sounds perfect," I said, tears of relief sliding down my cheeks. Uncle James glanced at me, his expression softening. "I'm sorry, Elena. We should have checked on you sooner. Your dad had no idea what was happening." "It's not his fault," I said quickly. "Grandma made me lie when he called. She was always listening." "I know, but still, family should look out for each other. From now on, that's exactly what we're going to do." As the truck sped south, carrying me away from the nightmare of the past months, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. Not just for escape, but for healing, for a future where I wouldn't have to be afraid all the time. I didn't know what that future would look like exactly, but for the first time since Mom died, I believed I might live to see it. What I couldn't have known then was how this experience would shape the rest of my life, how the darkness I had endured would one day lead me to become a light for others trapped in similar situations. My story wasn't over, it was just beginning a new chapter. And though the road ahead would have its own challenges, I would face them with a strength I never knew I possessed, a strength forged in the very crucible that had been meant to break me. The journey to Texas was a blur of highway miles, fast food restaurants, and one night in a motel with scratchy sheets but wonderfully warm rooms. Uncle James bought me new clothes at a department store just outside Omaha, jeans and t-shirts and a red sweater that was so soft I couldn't stop running my fingers over the fabric. He let me order whatever I wanted at mealtimes, though my shrunken stomach could only handle small portions. "Take it slow," he advised when I got sick after trying to eat a whole cheeseburger. "Your body needs time to adjust." It wasn't just my eating habits that needed adjustment. That first night in the motel, I woke up screaming from a nightmare where Grandma Martha was dragging me back to the basement. Uncle James came rushing from his adjoining room, concern etched on his face. "You're safe, Elena," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed but careful not to touch me until I fully woke. "She can't hurt you anymore." I nodded, but we both knew it would take more than words to heal the wounds of the past months. The physical bruises would fade quickly, the ones on my mind and heart would take much longer. We arrived in Midland, Texas on a sunny afternoon, 3 days after leaving Nebraska. The flat, dusty landscape couldn't have been more different from the snow-covered fields I'd left behind. Dad's apartment was in a complex filled with other oil workers, a simple 2-bedroom unit with minimal furniture, but most importantly, no dark basements or locked doors. Dad was still at the rig site when we arrived, but he had arranged to come home that evening. I paced nervously as the hours ticked by, suddenly afraid of what he might think of me. Would he believe what had happened? Or would he, like the sheriff, think I was troubled and making up stories? Uncle James seemed to read my thoughts. "Your dad knows everything, Elena. I called him from the road and told him exactly what I saw. He believes you completely." Relief washed over me, but anxiety still fluttered in my stomach. What if Dad was angry that I hadn't told him sooner? What if he blamed me for not being stronger or smarter about getting help? All my fears dissolved the moment I heard his key in the lock. Dad burst through the door, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. He stood frozen for a second, his eyes finding mine across the room. "Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking on my name. I ran to him, and he scooped me up in his arms like I was much younger than 8, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I didn't mind. After months of flinching from every touch, my father's embrace felt like coming home. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying, his tears dampening my hair. "I'm so sorry I left you with her. I didn't know. I should have known." "It's not your fault," I said, the words muffled against his shoulder. "She made me lie. She said you wouldn't believe me." He set me down gently, kneeling to look me in the eyes. His face was thinner than I remembered, tanned from working outdoors, with new lines around his eyes. "I will always believe you," he said fiercely. "Always. And I will never leave you unprotected again. That's a promise." The weeks that followed were a time of healing and adjustment. Dad arranged for me to see a child psychologist in Midland, a kind woman named Dr. Ramirez, who helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that Grandma Martha's cruelty stemmed from her own damaged mind, not from anything I had done wrong. "Some people are broken inside," Dr. Ramirez explained. "They hurt others because they're hurting. It doesn't make it right, but it helps to understand that it wasn't about you." Dad enrolled me in the local elementary school, where I slowly began to make friends. The teachers were patient with my gaps in education, giving me extra help to catch up on what I'd missed. With proper nutrition, my body began to recover, filling out to a healthy weight again. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they became less frequent, less vivid. Dad's contract ended in April, but instead of returning to Nebraska, he found work with the same company in Oklahoma. "A fresh start," he explained as we packed up the apartment, "somewhere with no bad memories." Our new home was a small house on the outskirts of Tulsa, with a backyard where Dad built me a swing set and planted a garden. "Your mom would have loved this place," he said as we planted tomatoes and peppers in the rich soil. "She always wanted a proper garden, not just the small plot we had back home." We rarely spoke of Grandma Martha. Dad had consulted a lawyer about pressing charges, but was advised that with no witnesses and only my word against hers, it would be difficult to prove in court. The prospect of putting me through a trial where I'd have to face her again and have my story questioned was too much to consider. "She won't hurt anyone else," Dad assured me. "I've made sure people know what she did." I later learned he had written detailed letters to Sheriff Thomas, to our old family doctor, to my former school principal, and to several neighbors, including Mrs. Wilson. He couldn't prosecute his mother, but he could ensure she was watched and that no other child would be left in her care. Summer came, bringing long, hot days filled with the simple joys I'd been denied: Ice cream on the porch, sprinklers on the lawn, trips to the community pool where Dad taught me to swim. My 10th birthday arrived in July, celebrated with a proper party, my first ever, with neighborhood kids, a chocolate cake, and more presents than I could have imagined. That night, as Dad tucked me into bed, I asked the question that had been bothering me for months. Do you think Mom knows what happened? Do you think she saw? Dad sat on the edge of my bed, considering his answer carefully. I believe your mom's spirit was with you the whole time, he said finally, not in a way that she could physically help, but watching over you, giving you the strength to survive until help came. I used to talk to her in Spanish, I confessed. When I was scared in the basement, it made me feel less alone. That was her, mi pequeña leona, he said, using Mom's old nickname for me, my little lioness. Your connection to her kept you going, and it always will. As the years passed, I grew into a teenager who carried the scars of my experience, but refused to be defined by them. The child psychologist had warned Dad that trauma often resurfaces during adolescence, and indeed, I went through a difficult period around 13, anger, rebellion, pushing boundaries to see if his love had limits. It didn't. Through every slammed door, every shouted accusation, every tear-filled night, Dad remained steady, patient, and unwavering in his support. You can be angry, he would say. You have every right, but I'm not going anywhere no matter how hard you push. By the time I entered high school, the worst of the storm had passed. I channeled my energy into academics and volunteering, particularly with a local shelter for abused women and children. Something about seeing others in situations similar to what I had experienced awakened a fierce protective instinct in me. You're a natural with the kids, the shelter director told me after watching me help a withdrawn 6-year-old open up through art therapy. They trust you. Have you thought about making this your career? I hadn't, but the seed was planted. When college application time came around, I focused on programs in psychology and social work. Dad supported my choice wholeheartedly, even when it meant moving away to attend the University of Oklahoma. Your mother would be so proud of you, he said as he helped me move into my dorm room. Using what happened to you to help others, that takes a special kind of strength. I was 19, and in my sophomore year when we received the news that Grandma Martha had died, a stroke, according to the brief message from a lawyer handling her estate. Dad asked if I wanted to attend the funeral. No, I said immediately. I forgave her for my own peace, but I don't need to pretend grief I don't feel. He nodded, understanding. I'll go, just to make sure it's real, he said grimly. Some monsters have a way of coming back if you don't see them buried. He returned from Nebraska the next day, his face lighter somehow. It's over, he said simply. Really over. We didn't discuss the matter further, but that night I dreamed of Mom for the first time in years. She was walking with me through a sunlit garden, speaking Spanish in her melodic voice, telling me how proud she was of the woman I was becoming. I woke with tears on my face, but a sense of peace in my heart. One chapter had truly closed. Others were waiting to be written. I graduated with honors and went on to earn a master's degree in clinical social work, specializing in trauma and recovery for children. My first job was at a community center in a low-income neighborhood in Dallas, where I worked primarily with kids who had experienced domestic violence or neglect. It was there that I met Michael, a pediatrician who volunteered at the center's free clinic every Thursday. He was kind, patient, and had an innate understanding of how to approach traumatized children, skills I later learned he'd developed growing up with a mother who suffered from severe mental illness. You can't save everyone. He told me one evening after I'd had a particularly difficult session with a young boy who reminded me painfully of myself at 8. But the ones you reach, you change their entire future. That matters, Elena. It matters more than you know. Our friendship evolved slowly into something deeper. Michael understood my occasional nightmares, my need for space sometimes, my triggers around dark, confined spaces. He never pushed, never demanded, simply offered steady support and genuine love. We married when I was 28, in a small ceremony with Dad and our closest friends. 2 years later, our daughter Sophia was born, named for the mother I had lost so young. Holding her for the first time, I felt a circle completing, life continuing despite the darkness that had tried to extinguish it. "She has your mother's eyes," Dad said, cradling his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. "And her spirit, I think. That same spark." As Sophia grew, I watched her develop with a mixture of joy and lingering fear. The abuse I had suffered had left its mark on my parenting. I was vigilant, perhaps overly so, always checking for signs of distress or unhappiness. Michael gently helped me find balance, to protect without smothering, to love without anxiety. "She's safe," he would remind me when I checked on her multiple times during the night. "We're both here. Nothing bad will happen to her." Gradually, I learned to trust that reassurance, to believe in safety again. When our son Pablo came along 3 years later, the fear was less, the joy more pure and uncomplicated. Dad lived long enough to see both his grandchildren start school, to teach them Spanish as Mom would have done, to tell them stories of their grandmother's courage and kindness. When cancer took him at 65, it was a peaceful passing, with family surrounding him and no regrets left unspoken. "You were my greatest accomplishment, Elena," he told me in his final days, "not because of anything I did, but because of who you chose to become despite everything. Remember that?" I have remembered, through all the years that followed. Now at 52, with grown children and a lifetime of helping others behind me, I understand what Dad meant. We don't choose what happens to us, but we do choose how it shapes us, how we use it, whether we let it destroy us or transform us. The little girl locked in that dark basement could never have imagined the life she would build, the love she would find, the family she would create, the hundreds of children she would help save from situations like her own. That is the true victory over cruelty, not just surviving, but thriving, not just escaping darkness, but becoming light for others. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this. Trauma may leave scars, but scars are evidence of healing. They remind us of our pain, yes, but also of our incredible capacity to mend, to grow, to become more than what tried to break us. My grandmother thought she was teaching me about the harshness of the world. Instead, she inadvertently taught me about the strength within myself, a strength that, once discovered, could never be taken away again. For that unintended lesson, if nothing else, I can now look back without bitterness. After all, I am my mother's daughter, her little lioness. And lions, even those with scars, never forget how to roar.